Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jerome Rodgers-Blake and I'm a professional animator. So firstly, I just want to say welcome to the first video of 2022, welcome to the channel, and what we're going to be talking about today is a Q&A. And I've asked animators to ask me any questions that you have that are animation related, and I'm going to do my best to answer them in this video. So without further ado, let's jump into the next section and get straight into it. The very first question, I'm going to do this in order as well, comes from Yasin Raharo, and he said this, and I quote, "Then I'll start if you don't mind. Can I use AI mocap solutions to speed up my workflow, or is it a crime?" Well, first and foremost, it's not a crime, my friend. Police aren't going to run in your house, kick open your door, put you in handcuffs and throw you in a jail cell just because you decide to use mocap in your project. No, it's not. In fact, I would actually recommend you use mocap as and when you can, depending on the animation style that you're going for. If you're going for a very realistic or photorealism style, then I recommend that you use mocap because it's going to help speed up your workflow drastically. There will be a lot of things that you could keyframe and you could keyframe them really well, but if you can get it mocapped, you're going to be able to block out or produce a good quality example of your work very quickly by using mocap. And by then, all you have to do then is refine your animation, clean things up, and take it from there. One thing I will say though, I know that there's a lot of, when it comes to aspiring animators, there's a lot of hostility about them using mocap in their projects. There's nothing wrong with using mocap in your projects, so long as that you state that it was actually originally based off mocap, and two, if you've gotten the mocap from a library somewhere like Mixamo or something like that, then you state that you got it from there and you cleaned it up and you show the before and you show the after, so that people who are looking at your work can see the improvements that you've made, so they can see what you've done, how you've taken it from base mocap to the final polished animation. It's very important that you do that. The animation community is very small, so don't try to pass for somebody else's work as your own, and yeah, just trust me, you just don't want to do that. So without further ado, let's go into the next question. Yasin, I hope I answered your question very thoroughly. It's a pretty simple one. It's not a crime to use mocap, and use it as it best serves you. So the next question comes from Visions Animation. That's the handle on Twitter anyway, and he asks this: Is it better workflow to set keys on as few bones as possible when starting blocking? Okay, quite simply, no, it's not. Firstly, I don't recommend you animate on bones, period. Reason why is because if you animate just on the bones, you're stuck with just FK, or if the bones just happen to have an IK set up, you're stuck with the just IK. You don't have the functionality that you would have on a full-fledged rig. So I wouldn't recommend animate on just bones anyway. The next part of your question was, let me read that again. As for setting keyframes, I would never recommend setting keyframes on, let's say, the hands on one set of frames and then later down the line having the legs set on something completely different. Don't do that. It's a sure way to cause yourself a lot of headache when you have to refine, retime, and polish your animations. Because just imagine, you've got your animation timeline set up now, and you've got this nice little walk cycle going on. You've got the arms animated on whatever frames intervals you've got them going on. Then you've got the legs, and then you've got to retime it and make things work just nice on and polish it. How are you going to do it? Exactly, it becomes a complete mess. So the best thing that you can do is to put a key on every single one of your controls. Basically what I'm telling you to do is best practice to keep your keys organized. And that goes for any level you are in animation, whether you're just beginning or whether you're a seasoned veteran or expert. Keep your keys organized, because I promise you it's going to save you a lot of headache in the future, because nobody starts off their animation doing the polish pass right away. You have to go through your stages. You have to go through your getting your reference, your blocking, your splining, refining, polishing, and you have to go through those stages. And almost not organizing your keyframes is a sure way to cause yourself a lot of problems, because inevitably when you submit your animation review to be reviewed, you're going to get feedback. You're going to have to redo some part of it or tweak it in some way. It's never going to be perfect out off the get-go. So please keep your keys organized. You save yourself a lot of trouble, and don't even just take my word for it. There's a seasoned animator called Kieth Lango, who's someone I looked at when I was in university and studying animation. And he mentions about organized keyframes, and there's something I'm actually going to leave a link to in the description below for you to have a read at. And yeah, have a read of that, take it from there, and ultimately my message to you is keep your keys organized. Don't have them all over the place. Okay, so next question comes from Justin. So, What is your purpose for fixing such refining animation you don't have reference for? Okay. When it comes to... Okay, when you're asking me this, it makes me kind of think that you're talking about creatures. Because when you say something that you don't have reference for, ultimately, my answer to you is find a reference. And be creative in where you look for reference. Like, for example, if you're working on a dragon, for example, dragons don't exist in the real world. So you're going to have to find something that's going to resemble the creature or that part of the creature as much as possible for you to get the move that is that you're looking for. So, for example, a dragon is basically a lizard with wings. So you can look at the way that typical lizards that we have in the real world move and operate, and then you could also look at bats' wings, because that's typically how wings for dragons look. They're shaped like bats' wings. So you can look at the way that those wings function in terms of body mechanics and just overall movement, and the same thing with part of the lizard, and then you combine those two, and then you able to get the best result that you can. There's obviously some wiggle room there, because, you know, dragons are usually bigger, so you've got to apply weight to it as well. But things like that, when you don't have reference for an animation, you have to ultimately go out and find your reference, because ultimately what you're using reference for is not to copy it one for one. You're using it to extrapolate the information that you need so that you can best apply it to your work. So, for example, there's been several times when I'm animating that I haven't had to use reference because I've done this so many times, I completely understand how a move works, and I wouldn't recommend anybody do that. Just as something I was able to do in my particular case. But if I was ever telling somebody how to animate something, I would say, hey, you want to get reference for this particular move that you're trying to do. And not so much that you can copy it one for one, just so you can understand the mechanics of the move, get the sense of timing down and things of that nature. And then you can then exaggerate things and play with the animation from there as you best see fit. So that's what I'd recommend. If you've got an animation that you don't have, if you need to do an animation or a move that you don't have reference for, find reference for the area of the animation that you're struggling in, because the fact that you're struggling tells me that you need reference to proceed and get the animation result that you're looking for. So that's ultimately my answer for you, is if you don't have the reference, find it. Be creative in where you look for it. There's many places you can go, such as Rhino House. There's a channel called Reference on YouTube. You know what I will do? I'll throw in some references that, basically some reference sites that I use to find reference in the description box below in this video, and you can use those as it best serves that animation, if that makes sense to you. So, oh, you have more to the question. So the next part of the question, still from Justin, says, how do you approach hair? I feel like I'm really struggling with hair / tails sometimes. It's like I have a plan, but when I get in there and start posing the hair, I'm losing track and not really actually knowing how to accomplish making them look good. Okay, for that one, when it comes to hair and tails, really it's just overlap and secondary action. It's really that simple. So what I'll say to you to do is study overlapping action and secondary action. They're two animation principles, and they're animation principles for a reason. They're actually something that I teach in the animation basics course, and I don't just teach you what they are, I teach you how to comprehensively apply them inside of your animations. And that's something, for me to break that down in this particular video would take way too long. So I would recommend you study overlapping action and secondary motion, because that would then influence how you would then understand how hair moves during motion and how tails work as well. Because tails, on creatures, they're used as like counterweights to balance the creature, and sometimes they just react basically as a secondary reaction to what the main body is doing. And the same is true more so with hair, because it doesn't do anything, it only reacts to what the main body is doing or any external force such as wind or water or things of that nature. So I would really highly recommend that you study people, study secondary action and overlapping action and follow through. Those are things that I recommend. And if you really need help, I have an animation basics course where I can teach you all of the animation principles and beyond in a 12-week course, and it's something that I highly recommend. So I hope that answers your question. As for the next one comes from Louis P. Melgar. Okay, I hope I didn't butcher your name, but let's get into your question. So it says, when animating for games, how do you handle animations that move away from the route? I know walking cycles and running cycles should stay in the same spot so that it can be modified in engine, but what about things like jumping or attacks that lunge forward or things like that? Okay, so it's quite a loaded question. I'm going to do my best to break it down. Yes, in some studios that I've worked at, I've had to animate the characters walking and running on the spot, and then the translation is then done in the engine. The reason why is because it then allows the game's designers to be flexible with the speed that the character is then translating in space. In other studios that I've worked at, I've actually had to translate the character through space when they're doing their running and walking cycles. And the reason for that is because the character needed to move at a specific speed. So I remember when I was working on Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3, that certain characters had to move at specific meters per second to be able to, just for game balancing sake, because of the way that Warhammer works. And when you have that speed set, you're able to see the distance inside of Maya, how far the character needs to move. And what's the beauty about that is that the animation that you get in Maya is going to be basically the same as you see in Engine. You know exactly what you're getting. The designers know exactly what they're getting, and it's a smooth process for everybody. So the way that works is, you touched on it a little bit already, and you mentioned about root motion. Inside of Unreal, and I'm going to link the documentation for it in the description below as well. Inside of Unreal and most game engines, the character has a reference point, which is also known as the root motion. And that tells the game where the character is in space and what direction it is that they're moving. And the purpose that this serves is it helps for blending and syncing animations, because, for example, if you have an attack that lunges forward, but then before that you have an animation where the character has turned, what would happen if you didn't have the root motion is that the character would snap back 90 degrees facing forward and then continue the attack. But with root motion in place, the character is able to rotate 90 degrees as they would in their locomotion, and then continue the attack in that same trajectory. It's like it remembers the position of the character and then plays your animation relative to the position and orientation of that point. So there's more to your question that you had. Where is it? So as for things like jumping, jumping can be handled in a number of ways, but the way that I've typically seen jumping handled is that the animation is then split up into three. So you animate the jump as you would normally, like, you'd have your anticipation, spring into the air, and then your landing. But then what would happen is you break the animation up into different parts. You have the beginning of the animation, or the initiation, where the character actually does the jump into the air, so the anticipation, and then springs into the air. And then you have the part of the in-air action, so that's the part where the character is actually off the ground. And that's usually, it could be a loop, because if the character jumps, they could be falling for an indefinite period of time. So that's what would happen. You have the jump, and then you have the falling section, split into more sections. So you have the initial spring into the air, so that's section 1. You have the part where it's reached the apex of the jump, that's section 2. Then from the apex to the falling, so a falling loop, that's section 3. Then you have the landing, which is the 4th section. So depending on the game that you're working on, the jump is, they're basically split up into different sections. And then the way that works is, you as the animator, you create your animation, you create a single jump animation from jumping from point A to B, and then you split the animation up, and then during the looping section, you just make sure that the first and last frame of that loop together seamlessly, and then it will blend into your landing animation. Basically what I'm saying to you is that the game engine will take care of the rest, but it's up to you to either split up the animations yourself, or the game's designers will split the animations up for you in engine, in the animation montage inside of Unreal. So that's something you can do as well. That's typically how it's handled, but it varies from studio to studio. But just bear in mind that ultimately what's going to end up happening is, for the sake of being able to reuse the animation as much as possible, it's going to be split up. So let's move on to the next question. So I hope that answered your question comprehensively. Let's move on to the next one. So the next question that I have is by Alex. So Alex asks, what is the process behind creation of facial animation for games that do not use facial capture solutions? What rigs do they use, and what workflows artists are using to achieve a pleasing/convincing result? Okay, so your question ultimately is about keyframed facial animation and what rigs are being used. Okay, as for what rigs are being used, that varies from studio to studio, because every studio you go to, they're going to have their own pipeline, they're going to have their own rigs, and they're going to have their own tools. So it's going to vary from studio to studio. But the reason you're asking this is because you want to practice keyframed facial animation. So then what I would recommend is look at a company called Faceware Tech. I'm going to link them in the description below. They have some really robust facial animation rigs that are also compatible inside of game engines, and they're really good and really detailed rigs, and they're great for practicing facial animation. You can get some really convincing results of those. As for not using facial capture solutions have gotten so good now, there's almost no reason not to use them. So studios will use them as and where they see fit. They'll use it as it best serves them. But I would recommend looking at Faceware Tech for the actual rigs to use, and then for actually understanding facial animation and how to get better at it, and just how to polish it, improve it, and just the process of going about it, because it is different to, you know, body mechanics animation. There's different things you have to pay attention to. The thing I would recommend you do is look at this book by Jason Aesop's. It's called Stop Staring. I've got a copy. I should have grabbed it before I recorded this video, but it's okay. I'm going to put a picture of it up on screen, and I'm going to leave a link to it in the description below. It's a fantastic book, and when I was studying animation, it's one of the things that really helped facial animation click. And once I read this book, I read it from cover to cover, and once I understood the concepts it was teaching me, I not only understood how to set up a facial rig as an animator, I also knew how to create convincing keyframe facial animation. It's not something that I've done for a very long time, but and a lot of studios, they don't specialize in facial animation. Facial animation is kind of thrown in, or it's outsourced to other studios, unless you're working for a company like Cubic Motion, which has now been rebranded to Epic Games at the recording of this video. But ultimately, read that book. It will really teach you a lot when it comes to facial animation. And as for facial rigs that you can use to practice, again, Faceware Tech, both of those will be linked in the description below. So I hope that has answered your question. And I believe that was all for the questions. Yeah, that was all for the questions that I received for this animation Q&A. I hope everybody watching has found some value in the questions that I've answered. And if you have any questions that are animation related, feel free to drop me them in a DM on Twitter, or email me at info@advancedanimationacademy.com. I've really enjoyed making this video. It's just a nice way to start 2022. We're going to have a lot more things coming later on this week and for the rest of 2022. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Check out the advancedanimationacademy.com, because I have mentorship schemes. I have animation courses that you can partake into, improve your skills. The first enrollment starts on the 10th of January, so it's very, very soon. So get enrolled and we can begin advancing your career. So until next time, take care.